President Trump has announced that the US has rescued the missing crew member of a military jet that was downed over Iran in what he's described as one of the most daring operations in American history. The US and Iran had been searching for the airman since Friday after his F-15 fighter plane was shot down by Tehran. Mr. Trump said the rescue involved dozens of aircraft operating deep in enemy territory. The weapons systems officer was aboard a US F-15 that was shot down in southern Iran. A pilot who was also on board was rescued earlier. Let's take a look at what Donald Trump has been posting on Truth Social. The president said, "We got him," before going on to call the rescue one of the most daring search and rescue operations in US history. The president confirmed the second pilot is now safe and sound before saying this is the first time in military memory 2 US pilots have been rescued separately deep in enemy territory. He then said, "We will never leave an American warfighter behind." Our World Affairs correspondent Joe Inwood has the story.
It was a race against time, one the Americans seem to have won. Across the rocky hills of southwestern Iran, local people searched for the missing weapons systems officer. A large reward had been promised. "Don't worry, he'll be found," the man says. The F-15E pilot had already been rescued. Now, in what President Trump called one of the most daring search and rescue operations in US history, the weapons system officer has also been found. In an online post, he wrote the airman was never truly alone, as they were monitoring his location 24 hours a day. "We will never leave an American warfighter behind," he added.
We lost the 2 aircraft, and in this particular case, fate was on our side, and we've been able to recover all 3 of those pilots. So I think it's going to be a morale boost, but then again, those military operations are going to be ongoing. So we may find disappointment right around the corner.
It comes amidst intensifying attacks at the heart of Iran's oil industry. Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened to destroy this country's power plants, its economy, even its desalination plants if a deal is not reached. Although these strikes appear to have been claimed by the US's main ally in this war, Israel.
After we destroyed 70% of their steel production capacity, which serves as raw material for their weapons, today we struck the petrochemical plants.
It's not just industrial sites now being targeted. New footage has emerged of the moment US airstrikes destroyed the recently constructed B-1 bridge near Tehran. Donald Trump threatened to bomb Iran, in his words, back to the Stone Ages. Even as they looked on the ruins of their own houses, Iranians living nearby did not take kindly to that suggestion.
When we were in the Stone Age, we were still more advanced than the Americans. When you love your homeland, you'd even love the rubble left from your homes.
Earlier, Donald Trump renewed his threats against Iran, taking to social media to say, "Remember when I gave Iran 10 days to make a deal or open up the Hormuz Strait? Time is running out. 48 hours before all hell will rain down on them." The Strait of Hormuz is a vital waterway, which has been effectively shut by Iran. The Revolutionary Guards released this footage showing what they say was their 95th missile barrage of the war. This has turned into an asymmetric conflict. US military muscle being met with Iranian economic pressure. It is still far from clear which will prove decisive. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Well, let's get more analysis on this operation, how it's unfolded over the past 2 days. With me is Mikey Kay, military analyst for the Security Brief. Hi, Mikey. So this plane was hit, this F-15 was hit on Friday. Take us through the plane and what we understand happened.
Yeah, just a quick refresher on the plane. I think we've got a picture of the F-15E Strike Eagle. It's a multi-role aircraft. It's got air-to-air capability, which means it can go after drones on drone cap, which is combat air patrol, or it can do air-to-ground precision strikes. But I think the important bit here is it's 2 crew operated. You've got a pilot in the front and you've got what's called a weapons systems officer or operator in the back. If you look at the back of that aircraft, you can see red livery, which is the red stripe, and LN. We know that those aircraft have been deployed from RAF Lakenheath, which is near Cambridge. in the UK, and they've been in the region. And then when you cross-transfer that with the debris, we know that aircraft that was shot down and that crew is likely to have been from RAF Lakenheath.
So the plane is hit. The crew know they need to eject. What happens then?
Yeah, the ejection is quite a brutal process. So the crew will, or the captain of the aircraft will only decide that they will eject when the aircraft becomes unflyable. In the early days, we didn't know why the aircraft was unflyable, because that could be a technical fault, could be friendly fire, or it could be, from surface-to-air missiles. This is the ejection seat here. So what happens is that when the captain decides to eject, there'll be a command sequence, and there's these little yellow and black handles based in between your legs. Some ejection seats have them actually above the head as well. You'll pull that handle and it'll set off a sequence. And because this is two crew, it's likely that the weapons systems operator in the back will eject first, and then milliseconds later, the pilot in the front will then also eject. What's important about the ejection is it's quite brutal, as I said. It's about a 25G punch from the rear. 25G basically means it's 25 times what your body weight is. So if you eject slightly with your head down, then your head becomes 25 times heavier what it is, and that can produce massive forces on the body. So you need to be in the right posture, you need to have your head back, and then you pull the handles, and then you come out. When you come out of the aircraft, the canopy will explode off, the ejection seat will come out, but then you're going into a quite significant airflow. So the aircraft will fly probably greater than 300 knots. And so you're hitting a 300 mile an hour wind, if you like. So that in itself is pretty brutal. And we haven't even spoken about sort of, what damage has been done to the aircraft. If it's a proximity fuse on one of the missiles, has that hit the cockpit? Is the pilot already injured as they're ejecting? So then as you come out, you then have a barometric gauge on the ejection seat. If it's above 10,000 feet, the seat will remain strapped to the pilots until it descends through 10,000 feet. I use 10,000, it's a nominal because of hypoxia and the requirement for oxygen. As it comes through 10,000 feet, it'll automatically separate. So now you've got two crew outside of this aircraft. The aircraft's obviously going to go to the impact site. And now, depending on the prevailing winds, these two parachutes are going to be blown in certain directions, likely separated, or in this case, were separated. And then you're looking at what type of terrain they're going to land on. So they're in a high threat environment. I think it's important to say that. So they'll have a 9mm pistol, which will be strapped to them at some place on their vest or on their body. And they'll be now coming down onto terrain. Now, in the terms of the weapon system operator in the back, we know that person came down relatively near high terrain. And the first thing that they need to do, so they're trained in what's called E&E, which is escape and evasion, and they're trained in what's called R2I, which is resistance to interrogation. Hopefully it doesn't get to the latter. So as soon as they land on, they'll be looking to gather up the parachute, gather up any kit that they don't need, the helmet, and try and conceal it somewhere if the ground allows concealment. And then what they've got to do is they've got to put distance between where they land. Hopefully they haven't injured themselves on landing. The landings on these type of parachutes, you can't really flare with them. You hit the ground hard. Hopefully they'll survive that. And then what they've got to do is they've got to put distance between where they've landed and where they need to evade to, because you've got all sorts of enemy forces that are going to be bearing down on this. You've got the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. You'll also likely have what's called the Basij, which are a volunteer militia force, and their numbers can range in hundreds of thousands to a million, depending on the war footing. And then you've got all this additional capability like man-portable air defense systems. The Iranians will know that the Americans will be sending in air packages to try and recover the crews. So they're going to flood that area with surface-to-air type missile systems.
So let's talk about what we know now about this operation. We know that it was a colonel. He was in the backseat of the plane, managing the systems operation. We know that he was injured. President Trump said he was injured, but will make a recovery. So we know that it was in mountainous terrain. What then happens? He lands and he sets off an alert to a beacon to tell the US, the military, where he is. Then they have to scramble to try and get to him before the Iranians.
Yeah, and so the double-edged sword on the beacon is that it's called a PRC 112. I used to carry them when I was flying over Baghdad. We had CSAR, Combat Search and Rescue, supporting us from Balad. And the great thing about the beacon is that as soon as you turn it on, it should be encrypted, which means that the Iranians won't be able to identify the beacons. That said, there is information out there to say that the Iranians do have Chinese technology that can do that. That's not verified or corroborated. But the beacon goes on, And then the combat search and rescue package, which we'll go into in a second. Actually, you can see it on screen here. It's a HC-130 aircraft, which is in the front there. It's a derivative of what's called the Hercules. And then you've got two HH-60 Jolly Green 2 Black Hawk derivatives, if you like. You can see them refueling on that, actually. And the difference between a normal Black Hawk and the HH-60 Jolly Green 2 is it's got a refueling probe on the front, which allows air-to-air refueling. That's actually, I flew helicopters for 25 years. That's actually quite dangerous in itself before you've got anywhere near the threat area. It's also got TFR, terrain following radar. So there's all sorts of bits on that. But that package will be alerted by that beacon going off. And the reason why I say it's a double-edged sword is because if the beacon is in an area where there's no terrain, that beacon obviously is able to go further. The signal is able to go further. But what we're starting to now get information on is that the second airman, the weapons systems operator, the colonel, started to put distance between himself and the impact point and go for terrain. Now that's smart in itself, because the higher you go with that beacon, obviously the further that beacon signal will go, which means the probability of detection will be higher. However, there's also chatter on open source intelligence to say that he was in a ravine and that beacon couldn't be seen. Now that makes sense, because in the first 12 hours, the combat search and rescue package got the pilot, but they couldn't find the weapons systems operators. And there's now information emerging on open source intelligence that the CIA got involved, and they got involved on two fronts. They got involved on what's called an info operations campaign. So they started to spread. So this is what we think of the Basij, which are the volunteer militia. So they're not IRGC, as you can see, but they are in significant numbers. So
they're on the hunt for him, and the Iranian authorities have offered a reward, haven't they, for anyone who finds him?
There was a significant reward offered by them, and they'll be flooding the area. But going back to the beacon piece and the CIA, so the CIA start putting out an information campaign which basically spreads the word in Iran that actually the second airman has actually been captured. And then the second piece is the CIA have technology to identify where that is, where the beacon can't.
OK, well, we know this was hugely daring. It did succeed, but apparently the chances of success are pretty slim. Military affairs analyst and retired Marine Corps Colonel Brendan Kearney gave his reaction and assessment to this news.
In this particular case, the United States was able to pull it off, and I'm thrilled for that. I guarantee you, for all the times that we've attempted to do this in the past, particularly in Vietnam, success rates are usually very, very low, but this is something we can celebrate.
Well, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, have put out new pictures of what they say is a wreckage of the plane, and you can see it very, very much in pieces there. We understand also that this rescue involved hundreds of troops as well as dozens of warplanes.
Right, so it's important to say, I saw this on open source intelligence before we came on air. This isn't the wreckage of the F-15E. What's happened here is that as part of the combat search and rescue, the CSAR package, so we've seen the Hercules, we've seen the Jolly Green 2 helicopters. What they've also done is they've flooded the area. They set up what's called a forward operating base in a remote. Yeah, please do run it again. A remote location inside Iran, which had two C-130 Hercules. That C-130 Hercules is what you see on that footage. What they've done is they've put two C-130 air transport aircraft in here with special force operators and ground troops to be able to provide force protection. So IRGC Basij that are coming in, and the information is they got within 3 kilometers. So the Americans have put these two in. The troops have got out and started doing the force protection on the location of where the weapon system operator is, but they can't get those aircraft out. They get stuck. We don't know why they were stuck, but there's information to suggest that it might have been they were stuck in sand or gravel. And so what the Americans have then done is that they've sent another 3 C-130 aircraft, landed on in the same location, picked up the troops that were due to extract from those 2, which is remarkable in itself. And then when those 3 have got airborne, they've left the 2 originals that were stuck behind, and then they've got American jets to come in and strike those aircraft and destroy those aircraft so the Iranians can't get their hands on them. And it's likely those aircraft were HC-130J, so they probably would have had sensitive equipment and capability on it, which is why the reason the US wanted to destroy them. So that wreckage that you can see on the screen, if we can play it one more time, that wreckage is the result of the US striking their own assets because those 2 assets couldn't get out of Iran and they didn't want the Iranians to put their hands on it.
Give us an idea of what would have been going through this colonel's mind from the moment the plane was hit, and his full knowledge that if he was captured by the Iranians, this would be an absolute disaster for the US.
So when I was flying over Baghdad, I did 3 tours over Baghdad on special operations. You are always digesting the information of the threat, and you never really think about the consequences of being shot down. But obviously you prepare yourself. You prepare yourself before you deploy. So you'll do survival, evasion, resistance and escape, which is called SEER. And then you'll have an evasion plan of action before you get airborne, which will look at likely routes out, what will happen, what the communications channels are. And you'll be trained. You'll be trained in resistance to interrogation. But Samantha, training and then the real life event, the adrenaline rush, I mean, I've thankfully never been shot down, but the adrenaline rush that the weapons system operator will have experience will have been absolutely off the charts. And that adrenaline will help in many ways, because if you're slightly injured, there are stories of, it was a friend of mine that ejected from a Jaguar aircraft way back. He survived on adrenaline after the ejection for about 30 seconds and then collapsed once the adrenaline had gone, and he'd broken his back basically. So the adrenaline can assist in the early bits, but as soon as it runs off, that's when the reality of the situation starts coming in. And then it's a mental game. So it's a mental game of you literally just have to center yourself and start thinking about the reality of where you are. So what are the procedures and protocols that you've been taught? Get the beacon on, hide all your gear, get to high ground, conceal yourself, and then what's going on with the threat. Establish communications, and then sort of you've got to take it bit by bit. It's remarkable because the longer time goes on, the more this colonel is going to be thinking, am I actually going to be rescued or not? So 48 hours, the mindset of that colonel and the psychology is going to be depreciating.